Hello again, Steve here, with a few comments on something I ran across a few times, and I think it's important for our quality of life. The topic is sophistry. Sophistry, just to make sure I don't make a mistake and be a sophist here. Just looked it up, dictionary.com. Subtle, tricky, superficially plausible, but generally fallacious method of reasoning. Now, this is sort of like logical fallacies, right? Although, to add in my way of my take on it, anyways, is the trickiness that's added in on it. A lot of times, when we're talking to friends or whoever, and there's logical fallacies thrown in, the intention is probably not to trip us up and to be basically fraudulent in words to us, right? But sophistry, on the other hand, seems to be, when you look it up in different dictionaries, it seems to have an intention, a tricky or a malevolent intent to it. And so it's easy enough to see how this, being aware of this tendency that people have sometimes based on motives, that are not in our best interest, to be sophists towards us. And of course the typical cadre is who could be really suspected of this, although lots of people are. But the ones that are most damaging are people like politicians and priestly classes of people, and of course different methods of sales trickery that's used on people to be to suck in the gullible and fleece them of their hard-earned wages or whatever. So I think it's important. It's something to I don't profess to be able to speak on this all that well, but I've come across it and I just thought I'd mention it because it's something to anything that affects our quality of life is an important thing to talk about. So maybe an example is, although I could be wrong on this, would be arguments along the lines of how sometimes people presume that association is causation. So, for example, now this may not be intended to be tricky. This might just be a fallacy that people are unaware of. But if people are aware of it and in other words, if somebody knows what they're saying is incorrect, but they're going forward with it anyway because it sounds like a logical, a reasoned extension, then that is an example of sophistry. As an example, a lot of times we're told that sodium or salt basically is harmful for us, really harmful for us. However, and of course the studies are that people who eat more salt have more heart disease and cancer and what have you, right? Whatever these are. I mean, I'm not some sort of a researcher into this. I'm just stating what I'm sure you have heard also along that line, right? So that's an association. In other words, you see an increased amount of sodium or salt intake, and in that group of people, an increased numbers of health problems. However, the reason that if somebody is saying this and they know there's more to the story, and they're not bringing it in, they're being sophist because there's lots of other factors that are in there. And what we find is when we look at it is that usually the foods that have the salt in are known to be unhealthy when eaten in large quantities. Things like cheese and preserved meats and what have you, and all kinds of canned and processed foods have a lot of salt in there for preservation and for taste, to get us to eat more of what is not healthy on that quantity. Whereas apparently there are examples of people who eat a fairly large amount of salt, but eat primarily a starch-based diet, plant-based diet, and they don't have these problems. So it flies in contrast. So generally speaking, it's an example. I'm just using that as an example where people will continue in an argument with following along those lines of hoping you don't notice that what they're saying basically is causation, or is correlation rather, is causation, but it's not necessarily. I mean, simply because in this case of the salt, there might be more to the story, right? And, politicians will do this all the time. I mean, they'll say things like, you know, uh, you know, you surely you care for the children, don't you? Therefore, we need more teachers. You know, but uh, but the problem is with that is that if you looked at the whole story, maybe, just maybe, the more and more teachers that we already have had have not improved the plight of children. So it's sometimes, sophistry plays to our emotions. It plays to our sense of wanting to be friends with others. It plays whatever manipulative way that somebody can try to put a proposition forward and frame it in some sort of a reasoned sounding approach. To me, that's sophistry, and it's to be watched for. It's to be watched for within ourselves, because I'm sure we've all, tried to put something over on somebody at some point in time, and we haven't reasoned it out ourselves completely. So if we're then going forward and trying to put it forward as truth, and we haven't examined it all, we're saying we know something, but we don't know something, and we're trying to make it sound like a reasoned argument, but it's not. And therefore, I'd probably call that sophistry. But I could be wrong though, so I could stand corrected on that. Anyway, just a few words on a word that it's not that I came across it recently. I've heard it lots of times, but I don't think I ever talked about it too much. There's a lot more people who are more qualified to talk on these sort of subjects with in a better reasoned way than I can. Once again, though, it's great chatting. I'll talk to you again soon. Sign off for now. Bye-bye for now.